Thanks very much, Stephen Carroll with Business. Going to have a look at what's grabbing headlines around the world in the newspapers now. Venezuela, we mentioned it in the news bulletin. It's in the spotlight after violent anti-government protests, leaving several people dead, isn't it, Flo?
That's right. It's getting a lot of attention in the Venezuelan press, as you can imagine. I pulled out an article from El Nacional, which is an anti-government paper online, and it's very critical of the president, Nicolas Maduro, for trying to silence independent television and radio outlets. For instance, last week, the government blocked the signal of NTN, which is a 24-hour news channel. And this article points out that only independent media are left, like newspapers, but the central bank won't sell them the dollars they need to import newsprint. But this article points out that despite this national information blockade, it hasn't stopped foreign media from really focusing on this government crackdown. The eyes of the world are on Venezuela. I also pulled out another cartoon this time from El Universal, which is another Venezuelan paper that's also against the government. And you can see here a drawing of Maduro, on the one hand, depicted as a dove there, but you can see his presidential sash there dripping with blood. So quite critical of the president as well.
And the papers outside of Venezuela are also talking about this.
That's right. The Wall Street Journal focuses on this today in their editorial and says that Venezuela is turning ugly. It's very critical of Maduro, calling him the strong man, Hugo Chavez's hand-picked successor, very critical of his, quote, hand getting heavier. Now, the Daily Beast wonders if this is the end of Hugo Chavez's Venezuela, and really focuses on who's in the street. Who are these protesters? Well, according to this article, they're mostly middle-class high school and college students who actually don't usually take to the streets, but they're really against the path that Venezuela is going down. Violence, inflation, the shortage of basic goods like toilet paper, etc. What they see as a dark future. And this article points out that even though they don't have a clear strategy, they're not going anywhere.
Now, a lot of focus on something completely different that we haven't mentioned in the news at all. Spain, its controversial bill to end women's rights to abortion on demand.
That's right. ABC, the very conservative paper, takes a closer look at this bill, which is set to pass after an opposition challenge was defeated in Parliament. Now, this article really applauds that and says that this is what the majority of Spaniards are in favor of. But The Independent, in its editorial today, takes a look at the timing of what it calls Spain's body politic. Why now? And it points out that Madrid's attempt to restrict the right to abortion is actually ill-timed, because even if it may have short-term advantages for the government, it's deeply damaging to Spain's long-term perspectives, because it's actually a gift to troublesome separatists, according to this article. For instance, the regional parliaments of Catalonia and Andalusia have already opposed this new law, which makes them look compassionate and progressive compared to the central government.
That's the news. Sport now, Olympic news.
That's right. I pulled out an interesting article about figure skating today in the International New York Times.
Why is that funny?
This is a very interesting article about the couples dances, because they only have 7 minutes of ice time to show their stuff to a panel of judges and to people from around the world. And what they have to prove during those 7 minutes is that though they're two people that are skating, they are a single unit, a, quote, duo that can twirl, trot, and leap harmoniously as one. But it turns out that a lot of figure skating couples actually are on a campaign throughout the year to show that they're a unit, with all sorts of photos that they post online, hoping that this will eventually lead them to the podium, although it's not quite sure if it works or not. But speaking of the podium, there's another interesting article also in the International New York Times talking about the podium. Now, we all know what the athletes who win get. First, second, and third, you get, of course, gold, silver, and bronze. But what about the other athletes who, finish at a respectable position, the near medalists?
Get nothing, do they?
No, actually, they get paper. They get an Olympic diploma.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Right.
at least if they're in 4th to 8th place, they get an Olympic diploma. But a lot of the athletes say it's kind of dorky. It's not the kind of thing that they're going to show off to their friends.
No.
In fact, to quote one of them, he says, "I honestly don't even remember getting something like that. Maybe they mailed it to me. Maybe my mother has it."
Oh, a bit sad, bit sad. Finally, The Independent, focusing on a very unique book festival.
That's right. This is the second edition of Burma's first ever book festival. Now, to quote this article in The Independent, it says that just 3 years ago, it would have seemed like a joke to have any kind of book festival. Now, it's interesting to note that even though very few books have been translated into other languages, Burma is actually a very deeply literary country. Even though 50 years of military dictatorship have left many writers either in prison or fleeing the country, it's still a very deeply literary country, and a lot of people are literate. And this article points out that this book festival is actually a source of optimism for the country as it takes its first steps in democracy.
Flo, thank you very much. That's Flo with the international papers on France 24. Coming up for you very shortly, we've got the news headlines. Plus, we have a special report in focus with Christians and with Muslims as well who fled the violence in the Central African Republic for the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, we report on how the animosity between them has also made its way over the border. Plus, in the news, we've just got an update, in fact, from Geneva coming in of that hostage situation which happened at Geneva Airport this morning. We've heard that the co-pilot took control of an Ethiopian plane. When the pilot went to the toilet, he then landed and left through the window on a rope. And we've also just been hearing in the last few minutes, in fact, the police saying there was no risk to passengers or crew at any time. And the co-pilot there was not even armed. That's the latest coming out of Geneva. We'll bring you an update after the break.